With a war ongoing in Ukraine, and concerns of a war on the horizon with Taiwan, it seems that everyone is looking toward Iran to glean whatever information that they can about the state of the world. Unfortunately, the analysis that we tend to hear about that is shallow. About as shallow as the Strait of Hormuz itself is. And that is further unfortunate, because there are a lot of interesting notes about the Hormuz situation. We just never reach the point where we can discuss them. Except for today. That is front and center on this edition of the Geopolitics Helpline. You always say that Iran has not learned that they can close the strait. And yeah, that seems obviously true. But has no one learned anything, or had any uncertainty resolved, in how the closure has played out? Quick note about the premise of the question. The viewer is referring to the amateur's fallacy, that people unfamiliar with Iranian politics discovered a couple of months ago what could happen along Hormuz, and have since treated it as brand new information for everyone involved. In contrast, those following Iranian politics were well aware that closing Hormuz gave Iran fundamental leverage. What we have seen since February 28th has played out according to those expectations. I also want to limit the scope of this conversation to things actually learned, and not what sort of capacities have been transformed. We could discuss a lot about how blowing US stockpiles has changed contingency plans for Taiwan, the subject of tomorrow's main channel video. But that is not new information as the question is constructed. Anyway, the viewer is right to question whether literally nothing was learned. Well, in fact, a bunch of interesting things have been learned, and also something was critically not learned. But you have to start with the premise that Hormuz was well understood ahead of time, and then you have to get lost in a dizzying array of caveats. Let me start with the weaker learning point before transitioning to the potentially more fundamental change in strategic thinking. We now have a much better idea of Trump's appetite for conflict, and I suspect that the truth here is going to inflame both sides of the political aisle. But here goes. One caricature of Trump is that he is a spineless president, unwilling to carry out any threat, and he will gorge himself on tacos from now until January 2029. Folks holding that belief were proven wrong. The United States fought a serious kinetic war against Iran, and paid a hefty financial cost to do so. $29 billion in military expenses, never mind second-order economic expenses, all completely foreseeable from the outset. We will see whether that was a wise idea in the long run, but you cannot question that Trump was willing to bite the bullet there. The flip side is that Trump has tiptoed around the Strait of Hormuz closure ever since the ceasefire started. He is essentially replacing a kinetic battle with a fiscal one. And I am sure that the other side of the aisle treats this as a smart, cost-conscious decision. Indeed, maybe he will send a more militant signal if progress is not forthcoming in ceasefire negotiations. Either way, though, this is still not the type of forceful mission that the warrior Trump camp likes to project. Putting those two pieces together, it is hard to make a blanket claim of what was learned. I also have doubts about what the American public learned, for reasons that we will discuss toward the end of the video. But what matters more is what foreign governments think. There, what was learned would depend on what an intelligence agency's file said about the president in the first place. So the learning could have gone either way. For what it is worth, I do not think that political elites subscribe to the same taco belief that is the prevailing internet thought, so this would likely be a net negative for Trump's global standing. Oh, and I mean that in terms of his reputation for resolve, not a general sense of support or agreeability. I also need to add a comment about the external validity of information learned here. Yes, Trump has shown a lack of willingness to fully follow through in Iran, but there is always a question of whether an action like this is informative about a leader's general disposition, or is special to the particular set of stakes. Trying to stick to Hormuz for a moment, one of the most ironic things about the situation is that we are fully aware of Iran's ability to shut it down. What has not been as obvious is the United States' ability to militarily reopen it. This was the bigger question mark circa 2025. And because Trump lacks the resolve to take risks along the strait, we cannot get new information on that. The basic tension is that, a few decades ago, the answer was a clear yes. The United States could reopen the strait. Been there, done that, thank you very much, tanker war. The concern is that the intervening years have brought about huge changes in drone technology, and so shippers may be worried that Iran will forever retain a disruptive capacity, no matter how many bombing runs the United States orders. Moreover, the prevailing online narrative is that this is obviously true, and it does not warrant much of a discussion. Rather than point to other things that I have said in response to that, let me instead show you the claims of Royal Navy Rear Admiral James Parkin, who is fully confident that Trump could forcefully reopen the strait. He just has to be willing to accept the risk of casualties to do so. Parkin was responsible for reopening the strait in 2019, when Iran seized a British-flagged vessel. Obviously, there are some differences between 2019 and today, but he knows much more about this than anyone here. If you disagree, then the way to adjudicate the truth is to have Trump try. But he is not, so we are not learning anything there. One small note here. A reason that Trump may not want to try is because the private US intelligence says that this would be a losing effort. So if you subscribe to the notion that Trump is super resolved on the issue, the way to square the circle is to conclude that fighting the battle is a bad idea. However, I do not think that the premise of Trump's high resolve is accurate here, so we cannot draw that conclusion. Finally, if we can move away from learning strictly about Hormuz, the war overall has taught me something that I think is far more important than anything related to international shipping. You do not need a PhD in political science like my self-respecting academic alter ego to know that this is the most politically polarized the United States has been in the modern era. Unfortunately, polarization is coloring everything about the war. It is painful to watch both sides of the political aisle fall for foreign disinformation, refuse to update information based on what is happening, or empathize that parties may take actions for reasons that do not wholly align with the individual's previously formed beliefs about their true motives. Let me give you a relevant and current example of what I mean. Over the past day, I have seen a lot of criticism online that Trump did not take a firm position on Taiwan during his summit with Xi. This, of course, is because it has been a long-running US policy to not have a position, lest it encourage Taiwan to disrupt the status quo. It also pacifies the PRC, because one of the things that substantively matters to the CCP is to not give Taiwan political standing. Taking a firm position on Taiwan breaks that, and thus, perhaps counterintuitively, encourages Beijing to take military action on the island. If you have listened to me enough on this channel, you already know how I feel about the importance of Taiwan's security. But the language that I would use as an official representative of the US government is different than how I express my views in this context, even though my actual opinion would remain unchanged. Trump is aware of this now, though I do not believe that he always was. This looks like a fairly unimportant photograph, but it is not. After Trump won the 2016 election, I suspect that someone in Taiwan floated the idea that Trump would not know to not take the Taiwan president's phone call. They were right, and it set off a firestorm. Generally speaking, if you do not know the details of any particular policy, that is fine. Most people are not paid to. I am paid to, and I still do not know everything. But when something weird happens, I spend a few moments researching the subject before starting to form an opinion. In this context, I would generally recommend that you get a feel for how your well-informed co-partisans think about a policy before developing strong feelings about it. For example, the secondary sanctions bill on Russia is often the subject of liberal scorn, because disconnected individuals just defaulted to being another Trump tariff trick. And yes, I get that Trump causes these problems himself, but it is a bad look when a bill has close to unanimous support among Democrats in the Senate, but Democratic voters are against it because they do not understand what is in it. Anyway, I lived through the Iraq War, and today is making the political environment of 2003 look like paradise by comparison. My chief concern now, and one that I did not have 3 months ago, is that, say, the PRC will find a way to slowly bait the United States into taking action in the Indo-Pacific that does not make it clear and obvious that Beijing started things. Then you have partisans from the party out of power, Democrats today, likely Republicans in 3 years, abandon the conflict. The president is handcuffed and cannot take the coercive steps necessary to deter an invasion. Taiwan falls, and the world economy descends into chaos as a result. Now, there is no guarantee that any of this will come to pass. The window for a PRC invasion is still likely a couple of years out, and even more likely after Trump leaves office. I do not expect political polarization in the United States to immediately end come the next presidential term, but I expect it to be better in a world where Trump is not the subject of presidential conversations, something that has not been true since 2015. In any case, I was previously living in a slightly more optimistic world, where I believed that in the event of a serious national security threat, we would see the appropriate rally round the flag effect, and that the United States would be in the correct position to handle the problem. Today, I am not so sure whether the national security threat is related to Taiwan or another world leader trying to get clever ideas elsewhere. And that is a problem that could outlive all of us. So, what are our takeaway lines for today? We might not have learned much about Iran's ability to wreak havoc along the strait. We did learn something about Trump's willingness to use military force. We did not learn about the US ability to reopen the strait via military means. And I, for one, learned just how deeply polarized Americans are. Well, on that happy note, I just dug up a very old video about why the United States has a policy of strategic ambiguity with Taiwan. Go check that one out. And if you found this edition of the Geopolitics Helpline to be a delightful experience, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.